Supreme Court just gave the Trump administration permission to resume the swift deportation of migrants to countries other than their own. The court's order gave no reason, but there's a lengthy dissent by Justice Sonia Sotomayor, who was joined by Justices Elena Kagan and Ketanji Brown Jackson. Sotomayor wrote, "The government has made clear in word and deed that it feels itself unconstrained by law, free to deport anyone, anywhere, without notice or an opportunity to be heard." The Department of Homeland Security celebrated the decision with a post that said, "Fire up the deportation planes." Joining me now, MSNBC legal analyst and former U.S. Attorney Joyce Vance, and Mark McKinnon, creator of The Circus and former advisor to President George W. Bush and John McCain. So, Joyce, what are the immediate implications of this decision?
Right, so this was an injunction entered by the lower court that told the government it couldn't continue to deport these folks to third-party countries while the litigation was underway. Now the government is free to resume doing that, and most shockingly, in the view of Justice Sotomayor, they're free to view that even though they violated two court orders in this case before the case was heard, at least on this shadow docket basis by the Supreme Court.
The decision was one paragraph. The dissent was 20 pages. What do you make and how notable is Sotomayor's very strongly worded dissent?
You know, it's consistent with concerns that are frequently expressed about the shadow docket, this emergency docket where the court decides often preliminary or temporary injunctions, usually preliminary, without full briefing, without oral argument, and then you get this sort of a one-paragraph order that doesn't do anything to help us understand what the court is thinking or why it ruled the way it did. There's no guidance for lower courts trying to apply this in the future. And so Justice Sotomayor's dissent makes three very compelling points about why the decision is flawed, but the reality is there is actually no decision there that people can read to understand the court's reasoning. This is not a process that promotes the rule of law in any way, and the very practical implication is that the government can now, for instance, take people who have lost temporary protected status as residents of this country, and it can deport them if their home country is not stable or if there are problems in that country. It can deport them to a country on another continent where they don't speak the language with absolutely no due process rights in play.
So, Mark, given all of that, nevertheless, how much of a win is this for the administration?
Well, the message seems to be that we can send the poor, huddled masses yearning to be free anywhere in the world. I'll tell you, from the Trump point of view, it's a huge win, and they believe that this is on this issue, they have incredible latitude, and the courts are just supporting them now. James Carville had the famous mantra for Democrats that it's the economy stupid. I suspect that Stephen Miller has a blinking sign above his desk that says it's immigration stupid. The issue ultimately, though, that I've been encouraged by is that there really is a fine line. There's no question that the American voters support the notion of sending back people who are here illegally or have committed a crime, but they also support due process and they want fair adjudication, and so this is really testing the limits of that fine line. But there really is a sense of fairness that even strong MAGA voters have, that we shouldn't be sending people to out of the country who haven't had a fair hearing in court.
Well, in Florida, Mark, the state is moving ahead with plans to turn a field in the Everglades into an immigration detention center. They call it Alligator Alcatraz. It got that name because officials say they won't need a lot of security. The area is surrounded by alligators and pythons, among other things. The Attorney General there wrote this: "In Florida, the swamp means something different." What's your reaction to the way they're talking about keeping migrants in check with alligators?
Well, this is very consistent with the sort of language and approach that the MAGA world and Trump are taking on the issue of immigration. And as I said, they feel like they have incredible latitude to use this kind of language that's cruel and unusual, but they have no fear of repercussions because, frankly, they don't get much from the voters on this issue.
Well, there were protests in Florida after the original announcement. It was organized by a combination of local groups and some Native Americans. So Our reporters down there talked to some of those folks. Here's what they said.
This is all about developmental and governmental greed.
They're using a highly controversial issue like this to try to get people to not remember why we protected this site in the first place.
It's rather unkind for people to be stationed out here, specifically if, from what I've seen, people aren't getting what they need in these detention centers. If there is an AC, if there isn't access to clean water, it will just be torture.
Collier County, where the Everglades are, voted Republican up and down the ballot in 2024. I should say that PBS, who spoke to those folks, said that they were local people involved in those local organizations. But even for Republicans, do you think there could be a line, or is this all, as you say, the sign over the desk that says it's immigration stupid?
No, I think they're driving a truck right through the line. I think most of the voters there really don't care. Florida in general has become very Republican, very Trump-supportive country. And again, on this issue, they just have incredible latitude. And I would say that probably, an overwhelming majority of the people in that county and in that state support this approach and the language.
I'm kind of throwing you a curveball here, Joyce, but do you see any way that this could be legally opposed, to have people staying in a place that this is what the people who are proposing it say? They're guarded largely by wildlife, and dangerous wildlife, obviously.
Well, look, here in Alabama, we call some parts of Florida Lower Alabama, and I guess you're seeing that in the politics behind using a prison like this to hold people. The unfortunate reality is that the best legal vehicle for challenging conditions in a prison is a federal statute that the federal government uses not infrequently to challenge conditions in state prisons. For instance, as a U.S. attorney, I worked on a challenge to inhumane conditions in the state of Alabama's prisons, including some that had open sewage running through the prison or a lack of adequate clean water for hygiene. You might expect to see a lawsuit like that if conditions in this Florida prison are substandard. But since bringing a lawsuit like that is completely within the control of Pam Bondi, Trump's Attorney General, I don't think we should hold our breath.
Joyce Vance, just when I think I've thrown you a curveball, you of course have